Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my review of Death Road's Tournament. So we had a look at this when it came out into early access probably a year ago, something like that, and I remember quite enjoying it, and I thought I'd come back for the 1.0 release to revisit it. It went 1.0 this week, last week, something like that, depending on when this video goes up. Now, as far as these reviews go, I don't do flowery bloody essays or anything like that. I just play it for X amount of time and then talk about my thoughts. That time is dictated by how much the game asks me to pay for it, right? So if you ask $5, I expect you give me an hour of clean fun. This game's going for $21.95 Australian, which by my math is around about 4.5 hours. So I put that much in and I enjoyed it, right? No regrets, time well spent, money well spent. However, will I be coming back to this after that time? Maybe not, because while there's some really innovative, clever things in the loop, I don't feel like the loop has super long legs, and you tie that in, as much as I dislike the over-reliance of meta progression of the current wave of roguelites, this game needs more. So the core loop isn't strong enough to get, you know, hundreds of hours out of me as something like maybe Slay the Spire might, and the meta progression's not there either. So that might sound like I'm being harsh, but again, it was time well spent, money well spent. I enjoyed my time with it. Depends on the individual whether you're going to get legs out of it longer term, and especially if you're the target audience as well. Like, I say this all the time, if Slay the Spire is a good example, but if you go and step into this arena, this new wave of flooded market roguelite card games, good's not usually good enough, because people are just going to go back and play the original game that they love for another 100 hours instead. So yeah, it's good, it's worth the money, but I feel like people that are like, this is their genre and this is all that they play, they'll probably put it down after a few hours and go back to whatever it is that they were playing. Anyway, so just some thoughts. So what is it? Well, Slay the Spire is a great example. It's a roguelite card battler, card deck development sort of game. I will just say this because people ask me all the time, they get confused. Roguelike with a K, roguelite with a T. Essentially, a roguelike with a K is like the game Rogue from bloody the 80s or whatever. It's a self-contained, it hangs on its run, it has no meta progression. At least that's the idea. And generally speaking, if it's a good roguelike, it's usually a stronger game, right? So the core loop has to hold up on its own. Every single run is another run that is self-contained and fun. You're not worried about unlocking XP or any shit like that between runs. So this is definitely a roguelite. You do unlock more cards that you can pop up in other runs. You can defeat bosses and unlock characters for further runs as well. However, it's not super heavy on the roguelite meta progression, beyond unlocking a few extra cards that aren't actually tiered. There's no like rating system or colored rarity or anything like that. Is a little bit odd to see, because I don't think anyone's going to deny that the roguelite concept, the idea of just throwing dopamine at a player every 10 minutes after they finish a run, here's some flashing shit that you unlocked, play again. You know, it is aiming at that in-your-face, low-hanging fruit, stimulation, ADHD sort of nonsense. So it seems a little bit strange that it's kind of bland, these cards. Kind of makes me think that either they should have just gone roguelike entirely and have no meta progression, just have everything in for every run, bugger it, you know, own it. Or maybe they should have lent into the sort of bright colors and flashy cards, because the way that it works at the moment is kind of, and you don't exactly get very excited when you unlock stuff between runs. The art, the aesthetic, that whole direction, and some of the core mechanics, all really cool stuff going on here. But once you master it, you sort of have it. And an example being, I know I'm putting the cart before the horse. I will discuss the loop a little bit more and tell you about the cool things, but just while it's on my mind, an example being, a lot of the cars and characters have their own sort of build in mind. This character plays this way or that way and what have you, right? And the starting loadout that they give you, the default cards, parts of your car, are kind of good enough that they complement the build in such a way that a lot of the runs, when you started to really perfect it, I'm just hoarding cards and not equipping them because they don't synergize with the character's core run, right? The game will give me bloody front-firing machine guns when what I want is a rear-firing oil slick that does the handling damage instead of the hull damage, right? I'll come back to this, of course. but I hope I can illustrate my point. It's a bit strange. The self-contained package of the character that you pick up with his starting gear is going to get you through 3/4 of a run before maybe you think about pivoting whole cloth because you collected a whole bunch of gear. I would argue this is not a design decision and kind of just shows that once someone who's all over these sort of games starts tweaking the nips a bit, tweaking the knobs and poking and prodding it, it falls over. Geez, I'm going pretty hard on it, but again, these are my thoughts. I'm not going to beat around the bush. I don't regret my time with it. I had a lot of fun, but it does have some issues in the long term. So the loop is that you construct a deck that you draw from, and it's based on equipable gear. Now, the first time I ever saw this was in a game called Card Hunter, which any chance I get to shout that out, I will. It's free to play. It's on Steam. You should check it out. It's like a tabletop dungeon crawler. It's sort of doing this meta aesthetic of if you were playing D&D with the boys at the table and you equip your little armor and sword. So that's the idea, and that's where I think it's been lifted from. And I like to see that more and more than just the whole cloth card mechanic that you see from the Dominion card game, board game, whatever. So you get a set of tires, and that set of tires will have a bunch of cards associated with it that gets put into your card pile. And then you've got different parts of parts of car, like, the roof, the bonnet, the bloody sides, the engine as well, that sort of thing. So it's taken that idea of equipping your bloody dude with plate mail and a helmet, but put it onto a car really in quite a clever way. You draw a hand of cards, and your driver has some default cards as well, some sort of racial cards specific to him that dictate how you kind of have to build your deck. And it's a kind of limiting, to be honest, because they refresh every turn. There's 3 of them. They're so powerful. They're just utility cards. But you have like a red health bar, which is your normal sort of body damage fare, but you also have your handling is what it's called, and it acts as multiple things. It's mana for spending cards, so your card will cost 3 handling, you lose 3 handling, and it ticks down, and essentially you see this mechanic similar to something like out of bloody Blood Bowl of all things. If you want to push right up to the edge, you can, but if you manage to run your handling down to 0, you will spin out or skid or whatever it's called. And then you've got a separate side deck with skid cards in there that'll make your car, move left, right, lose a gear. And then you can do all sorts of wild stuff. And it can snowball into you smashing into a wall or into other cars and getting killed or destroying other dudes. And the enemies have these little skid decks as well. So there's a legitimate strategy behind keeping enough handling in an armor kind of sense, because you don't refresh it until your next turn. So if you play all your cards down to 1 handling, 1 mana or whatever left, and then the enemy has his turn, all he's got to do is just bump you once and you will spin out, and you can actually do some pretty catastrophic damage to yourself. So there actually is a really, really clever loop of trying to figure out how gutsy, how badly you want to risk using up all your handling, or maybe you want to sort of turtle up. And this comes into play with all the positioning. The positioning is actually really quite unique and very powerful. You can see what enemies have on their car as well versus you, and your build might be like a rear fighting oil slick kind of deal, and maybe they're shooting railguns straight forward or bloody smoke rocket launchers off to the side. So the sort of mobility and moving around each other is actually a really big part of it, and probably the most fun part. You've got a gearbox as well, and you can shift up and down gears, and that will activate different levels of the ability cards that you unlock. And generally speaking, the higher the gear, the higher value the card. What's the downside, you might ask? Well, if you spin out at a higher gear, you have to draw more cards from your spin out deck, your skid deck. So if you skid at gear 1, you only draw 1 card. It's not that bad, but top gear is 5th gear, and that's 5 cards, and your card just goes bloody all over the place when it spins out. So again, you're seeing a theme of risk versus reward. You can try and make a build around it, and certain cards and drivers have that, where you want to steel yourself against it. In fact, I think the default main dude is big on, if he's in 5th gear, he gets skid armor going into the next turn. So you kind of want to push him to 5th gear and keep him in 5th gear and try and maybe outrun dudes and outmaneuver them, that sort of thing. Anyway, so the gearbox, the handling, the skid deck, the positional card armor, I don't know what to call it, but the slottable card stacks that make up your deck. All this is really, really clever, and I really, really like it. I just noticed while I was sitting here ranting, looking at the Steam page, it said that the developer and publisher was Knights of Unity, and I'm like, hang on a sec, that rings a bell. And I checked it, and Card Hunter, the game I suggested that I think is brilliant, that I said that they lifted these mechanics from, is what these guys made. So, actually, no. You know what? Now that I think about it, I think the Knights of Unity, here we go, trip down memory lane. So I think the Knights of Unity are the placeholder developers for Card Hunter nowadays, but they're not the actual dudes that originally made it. The original dudes that made it made Void Bastards, Blue Manchu. They're an Australian company. I remember all of this. And there's another brilliant game as well. So what they did is they sold on the rights or whatever, but they've organised with Knights of whatever they're called, but they organised with the Knights of Unity to take over sort of being caretakers of Card Hunter going into the future, which is great because it seemed like they'd moved on. It was kind of a dead done game. So there you go. So what they've done, oh my God. So this suddenly got quite complicated. So they've taken the mechanic that Blue Manchu invented and they've been sort of fostering and caretaking from their previous game, Card Hunter, and then they've put it into this game, which is cool. They've done well, but like if you ask me to tell you straight, Card Hunter is infinitely better. That's much better a game. Anyway, a little bit of an aside. So look, the loop's cool. It's got some of that original OG Card Hunter DNA in it. It's got a cool aesthetic, a cool setting. However, I don't think it has the legs, now that this is turning into a compare it to Card Hunter thing, as something like Card Hunter. Card Hunter is something you could put 100 hours into, free or not. In fact, I think you can buy adventures and, there's sort of little DLC things in it, which it's all worth it, in my opinion. Great game. But this is good. I don't want to call it a gimmick, but maybe the gimmick is the correct word. There's really good mechanics going on here that are a lot of fun for probably the first 3 hours, something like that. And then after that, you kind of realize that's all that this game has. But that's fine as well because it matches the price tag. I cannot stress this enough. My system may be arbitrary and you can come up with your own dollar system as well, but at the end of the day, if you ask X dollars and you give X hours, I'm happy. That's fine. That should be the same for everyone. Not every game is going to give me 10,000 hours of value, and generally speaking, it's unreasonable to expect that sort of exchange as well. So for my money, I had fun with it for the time that it gave me. Anyway, don't need to waffle. Might just leave it there for the time being. I'll catch you guys on the next one.